The movie is beautiful, I think, very deeply interesting, and there are many questions, I think, and I will give the microphone to the people so that they can ask you questions. Avete già qualche domanda pronta? Se ce l'avete, alzate la mano. Ok, there is already a question here for you.
Thank you. Is there a parallel here between this film and the film on the Shoah? So the idea to try to explain something that a period that the new generations will not understand any case. Try to explain this period. Try to talk about this period. Try to give a testimony of this period, but knowing that any case, the new generations that have not seen the Cold War, that have not seen the Shoah, will any case not understand it anyway. The question is if there was a parallel between the two films, between the two films on two very different things. One is the Shoah, and the other one is the Cold War and the end of the Cold War, thanks to the work of this extraordinary man.
There was no deliberate link there. It was the film Night Will Fall ended at the beginning of the Cold War, and meeting Gorbachev, of course, was the end of the Cold War. But I think that is really more coincidence than any particular passion of mine. When I went to do the Gorbachev film, it wasn't because of what had happened with the previous film. It was really because we had an opportunity through the television channel that commissioned Night Will Fall, who wanted another film, and we discussed at great length what that film should be. This is MDR and Arte in Germany and France, and they said, well, if we can get access to Gorbachev, that would be fascinating because we're always interested in that. But the only link to Night Will Fall was because it was the same commissioner.
So at the beginning, you were commissioned a movie and not Mr. Herzog, just you at the beginning.
Was it just you, not Werner, at the beginning?
No, initially it was just me. And once I had been given the opportunity, I thought, because I had worked over many years with Werner, I thought that it would be not just an experiment, but it would make it a much more interesting film if I could persuade Werner to join me. And particularly because I did know that Werner had a passion about the reunification of Germany. We discussed it in the past, and I knew he would be interested in that. And so when given the opportunity to join me and particularly to conduct the main interviews, Werner was very keen. And that was then when we started the process. I had already got interest from Gorbachev at that moment.
Okay. You had already worked with Mr. Herzog many times, but you had been a producer, not a director with him. So it was different this time. How did you separate your work? How did you collaborate on the movie?
Well, working with Werner Herzog is something of a unique experience. We originally, and as you say, it was a long time. I first met him and worked with him over 30 years ago when I was a commissioner at the BBC, and was able to commission Werner to make a film called Lessons of Darkness about the invasion of Kuwait, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait. And we got to know each other then, and that relationship has continued now for 3 decades. Usually, of course, it's my role to support Werner. Werner is a sort of, if you like, almost a mythical figure in our business, and it's not, and there's never been for me to try and tell Werner how to make films, but we've worked well together, and I've usually operated as the person who helps put the package together for him, helps him a little bit with a little bit of editorial input, and enables him. It's now over 15 films, I think, we've worked together. This one, the one you've just seen, is a little bit unique because in this instance, we, as you've seen, we were titled co-directors, and we worked out a way of doing that without really tripping over each other. And how we did that was that Werner was the person who was going to ask the questions and have the dialogue with Mikhail Gorbachev. And we set that and went back 4 times in the end, to and fro. And I then filmed all the rest of the material that went with it. And then we jointly edited. So I initially put a sort of a long cut of the film together. Werner then came to London, and we sat together and went through the film. And you will almost certainly, anybody in the audience who views or who knows Werner Herzog's film will recognize a lot of the stylistic inputs that Werner has there. So if I can just give you one example, because I always find it very amusing, was when the Iron Curtain came down between Austria and Hungary.
Yeah.
That sequence there, where we had the Nemeth, the last Prime Minister of Hungary, saying he had to reconstruct the Iron Curtain. Now that was a momentous occasion for Europe, but Werner remembered that at the time he was pretty sure it was not very high up in the news when he was watching the news that night. So in the edit, he said, look, go back into the archives and see if you can find what the news was saying that night. Mm-hmm. So we did, and we found absolutely correct that on the Austrian news that night, the lead story was about slugs.
Yeah.
And it was then, this is so typically Werner Herzog. He said, good, we're going to put the whole of that news story into the film. And we did, and you could see that sequence was completely different as a result.
So I imagine there were many changes during, while you were doing the movie. Did you have a sort of a script before? Did you change it much during the movie, or? That's
also something that the broadcasters like it, but the filmmakers don't like it. So what happened there was that we were fortunate with this kind of film that it had an obvious chronology, mm-hmm. But it followed the period, of course, that and the 7 years that Gorbachev was in power, and so we had a kind of inbuilt script, if you like, following those sequences. And more important, I think, was the script was dictated by what Gorbachev himself wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So Werner had some notes scribbled on a tiny piece of paper, some notes, but he hardly used those either. So that the central core of the film was driven by the fact that Werner's dialogue with Gorbachev took him along various pathways. It didn't cover everything in his period of prime minister presidency. It didn't cover the whole of the Soviet Union or what was happening around the world. There were areas we didn't really touch upon except en passant, like Afghanistan or various other major incidences. but we weren't trying to do a detailed history, and we didn't need a script from that point of view.
Yeah.
The main purpose of the film was to try and touch the human being that was Gorbachev, to try and get beneath the political veneer and try and understand the man. And for that, it really didn't need a script. It didn't matter that we didn't touch all the points, I think, in his whole career.
Yeah, of course. I understand.
Thank you for your documentary. It was very interesting. And my question is, are you going to make any sequel of that with any other politician, Russian politician, or because it could be interesting to see and to better understand what happened on the flip side of the Berlin Wall. So the voice of Gorbachev was unbelievable and very interesting. But what happened on the opposite side? Because in my view, up until now, there was no, how to say, deep investigation on that, on what happened, especially in that place that was Eastern German, because the forehead of the Soviet Union was Eastern Germany. And the investigation, in my view, up until now is quite poor on what happened in the past. Thank you.
What happened there really was that although we lined up a lot of people who were both contemporary with what happened and in political positions in power, in the end, we really were relying much more upon archive and sort of, in a way, Werner's opinion about what happened on the fall of the wall, because he, if you remember in the film, he sort of said that he never thought it would happen because Willy Brandt was against it, and he wanted to walk around the whole of Germany in a kind of a symbolic way in order to stress how important this was, but he never thought it would happen. And in the end, the fact that it happened was enough, and Werner didn't want to go around a whole series of different politicians to reinforce that. And so we only concentrated on the one who was the advisor to Helmut Kohl, the defense minister at the time. And in the end, I think it was enough, because it was the relationship between people and Gorbachev's own, I think, friendship with. I mean, don't forget that Gorbachev originally didn't want the unification. That was not part of his plan at all. It's rather the same way he didn't want the dissolution of the Soviet Union. It happened because he'd started the events that made it irreversible. So in the end, it was just to get a sense of what the events actually overtook the man and the purpose themselves. So I don't know if that covers your query, because I didn't catch it properly, but I would love to make another film, but unfortunately it won't be with Gorbachev, who is now, I think he's ailing. He's he's an ill man. He does appear just occasionally in little bursts at the moment, but he can't concentrate enough, I think, to do that. So, I mean, sadly, the answer is no. Perhaps the person we should do the film with now next is Angela Merkel before she leaves. But I don't think Werner will do that.
But actually, I understand very well the question that this spectator did now, because the movie is very emotional, and we really see it from a very human point of view more than a political one. But it opens a lot of questions, a lot of things that we start to understand, to observe, that that we see in the movie, and they are just I don't know how to say it, but they are stimulating our curiosity to know more, to know more about what happened then and what's happening now also. So actually, I understand the question. I would like you to do another movie, sort of a sequel, maybe not with Gorbachev, but on this subject.
I think it's absolutely true. We deliberately didn't try and overtly relate Gorbachev's period in office with what's happening today. Simply, I mean, for two reasons. One, because I think it's pretty obvious when he is talking about characters and politicians and the politicians of today who he's referring to, whether it's Vladimir Putin or Trump or whoever, the kind of contrast between, I think, a man like Gorbachev and our current political leaders, I think speaks for itself. I don't think he didn't have to point it out, and we certainly didn't need to point it out either. So the second reason for not bringing, if you like, the debate up today is because he's in a very precarious position in Russia. He's stubborn, he won't leave, he doesn't want to leave. He wants to die in Moscow, his home. And his relationship with Putin is very delicate. The two men clearly don't like each other. They don't get on. But politically, he has to be quite careful about what he does in criticizing the president. And on big national occasions, he's pulled out and put on the wall in the Kremlin and so on. So we still see him there. But although we weren't banned from talking about current politics, we decided that we weren't going to do that. We weren't going to put him in a difficult position. He didn't lay any restrictions on us when we went to interview him, but we thought it was much more politic not to try and make that comparison today.
Okay. Mr. Herzog also made questions that were not so easy to answer. Was Mr. Gorbachev always available to any questions, to any discussion?
He was perfectly open to being asked anything, and we couldn't put everything he did answer into the film. I mean, we had much more than you could see in that thing. We selected what we thought was the most relevant. But it goes back to in a way, the relationship between the two men, between Werner Herzog and Mikhail Gorbachev. It was the kind of interview that I think is unique because of the ability of someone like Werner to ask questions that were to some extent unexpected. So I, for example, could never have sat in front of a man like Gorbachev and said, "Do you still smell the perfume of your wife, your deceased wife?" It's an extraordinary thing to be able to say in the course of an interview like that. But it worked because Gorbachev took it in the sense that it was meant, and I found it very emotional in the end that he could do that. And I think that's what makes this interview very different to any kind of interview that Gorbachev would otherwise have given. And in answer to your question, no, we had no restrictions on what it was self-imposed restrictions, but nothing that he laid down. Well, it wasn't so much even a choice. It was you're confronted with the situation of being able to talk to one of the great politicians of the 20th century. And it's a unique opportunity. And for me, I felt that I wanted to make this something bigger than, say, a political program on the BBC, for example. I wanted this to be something that had some kind of cinematic life and was bigger and greater. To do that, I needed something special. And so I had no question that the right person would have been, partly because I know him well and we've worked together for many years, that Werner Herzog would give me that kind of situation that would enable it to be a much bigger film. And I have to leave it to your judgment whether it works or not, but it seems to have done around the world that people have really appreciated that. So yes, Werner was really the first and only choice.
I think that the amazing thing of this movie is that apparently it's a very traditional one, because it's an interview, a series of interviews. But then you understand that they are not traditional at all, because Mr. Herzog is so involved in what he's asking, and he is so connected to the interviewed. So he is very emotional in all the questions he asks, and he's never a journalist.
I very much agree with that. That's it's had an extraordinary reception around the world, and I think, as you say, because of that, it's because partly the structure, partly the way he's able to ask questions, and I think I think somehow it provoked Gorbachev in talking. It was a discussion rather than an interview, and Gorbachev comes across, I think, in a different way to what he would have normally done as a conventional political interview on normal television. I hope so. At any rate, I mean, you have to ask your audience whether that's the case or not. But that was the intention.
So maybe we have finished our questions. So we are really thankful for all your answers and to be so available, really. So, and for the movie, of course. And I personally hope that you are going to do some other movie about the contemporary world.
How about one on Berlusconi? Now that would be interesting.
Yeah. Please do it.
Werner on Berlusconi. Let's get that one going.
I'm not sure that Mr. Herzog would connect with Mr. Berlusconi, such as with Gorbachev, but if you try, I'm happy. So thank you very much, really, for the movie and for everything.
Great pleasure. I hope you all enjoyed the film.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Take care. Good night.
Goodbye. Good night.